All right, so we're going to start things off with the Superman on film update of the week. Are you ready for this one, folks? Today is February 25th, 2022, and tomorrow, February 26th, will mark 1 year since there's been any real concrete news on a Superman movie.
So
The
that's the
really
news.
That is the news. The
That's the
news
news. It's been a
continues to
year.
be that there's no news. That's yeah. There's the drought continues, but what we can kind of do in lieu of dissecting some serious, groundbreaking news about a Superman movie, we can talk about the ramifications of that Peacemaker cameo last week. Because in the days following that, it's funny because when we talked about it, we were nothing but ecstatic. And it was just like, oh, cool. They had some Justice League people show up at the end of
Right.
Peacemaker, and there was a good joke, and we couldn't believe that they got Momoa and Ezra to do it. And, it's all, we were just over the moon. But apparently, things were a little bit divisive online. Did you see any interesting takes, Brett?
Interesting. I mean, they were just the usual, like, this is what the DC universe is now without Snyder. It's a big joke. And I was just like, oh my God. Like, really, just the reaching was
Yeah.
unbelievable.
I mean, I couldn't. It's an unfortunate thing that, to me, that was a clear, just sort of almost like a victory lap for the DCEU to kind of have these Justice League characters that got their own movies and had been built up to this point. The fact that they're still being acknowledged in
Yeah.
2022, and that the fact that there's plans for them for the future, I feel like this is good news. There's been so much uncertainty over the years about how things are going to go, well, who's getting rebooted, what's getting recast, what stays, what goes. So I thought it was nothing but good news. But what was interesting is that, see, it didn't phase me at all that Batman and Cyborg weren't there. I don't know what did it phase you, by the way, like when you saw it was just four of them instead of the whole team. Did that like weird you out at all? Did it call your attention at
Yeah, I
all?
wouldn't say it weirded me out, but I noticed because I was like, okay, where's the other two? But then
Yeah.
like, a quick, 2 seconds of thought and you go, well, they're still kind of figuring out the Batman thing. We have a new one coming out. We're
Yeah.
gonna be kind of sending Ben Affleck off. We know Keaton's coming in, but that hasn't officially happened yet
Yeah.
because the movie hasn't released, so they don't want to jump the gun. And then obviously there's the Ray Fisher stuff with Cyborg, which I imagine they kind of probably want to just, dance around a little
Yeah,
longer.
because yeah, well, because that's what I was getting at. Because, like, to me, it didn't phase me that they weren't there. I don't think of the Justice League as always having to show up en masse to every single mission. So again, that didn't phase me. But in the days following the release of that episode of Peacemaker, it was revealed that they had, in fact, hired stunt doubles to be Batman and Cyborg, and that they had been filmed, and that ultimately DC sort of nixed those cameos. They took them out, only leaving the four that we saw.
Right.
And that's the fact that DC kind of took that editorial power and told James Gunn, no, we're not going to let you use these two. I feel like there are definitely some implications about that, and you kind of touched on it, but with the Ray Fisher thing, we got to remember there was a time when there was going to be Cyborg in this Flash movie. All right. First, there was going to be a whole different Flash movie directed by Rick Famuyiwa that was going to have a lot of Cyborg in it. But then, even when Andy Muschietti took over, now with a new script and a new story and a new direction, they had still kept a place in it for him until he got into this big clash with the studio.
Right.
And he's still out there seeking apologies for things. I have a whole episode sort of breaking down the ins and outs of the accusations as well as the responses to that. If you go back a few episodes of this show, you can find that. But essentially, remember, he drew a line in the sand with Walter Hamada where he said, I will not be in any DC production that has Walter Hamada as a producer on it. And they were not going to fire Hamada. So he essentially fired himself by saying
Right.
that Fisher essentially, fired himself. So him being eliminated, I guess, was sort of obvious. But the one that wasn't so obvious for some folks was Batman, because we know that Batfleck is going to show up in the Flash. And we know that that's going to be one of the cool novelties, that in the Flash we're going to see this Barry with that Bruce, kind of building on what we've seen, what we saw in both versions of Justice League. But that ultimately Affleck is going to be sort of written out and replaced by OG Michael Keaton Batman Bruce Wayne instead. So what I think, like, yeah, that's a cool shirt. That's a cool shirt. But yeah, so since they're getting rid of him, but he's still going to be in the Flash, some people are like, well, it doesn't make any sense. He should be there. Peacemaker takes place before the Flash is going to reset things. Continuity. And listen, you may be right. You know what? In the timeline, in the canon, he is still very much part of the team. But what you have to remember is that for the folks running DC on film right now, he is no longer the guy. They are preparing to have a new face be Batman, or two new faces be Batman. This Peacemaker thing came out a week ago, and the Batman comes out in 2 weeks. We're about to meet the Robert Pattinson Batman for
in
start.
a week.
In a week, March 5th.
Next week. It's a week from the release of this podcast, March 4th. Wow. Actually, yeah.
I can't believe. Yeah, honestly, I've been talking about this Batman movie so many years. I'm like in denial that we're that
delays
close
and everything. Yeah,
it was going to come out in June of last year at some point. It's been a trip, but yeah. So not only are we about to meet a whole new Batman that they want to get into the public consciousness as this is our like mainline Batman, but they're going to be shifting the focus in these DCEU sort of, crossover type movies to make Michael Keaton the Batman in that world. So to me, it's like they're trying to get us less detached to the Batfleck Batman, for better or worse, since they know that he's getting transitioned out. I feel like the reason that they cut him out of Peacemaker, that they said, we don't want that version of Batman represented here anymore, I think it's really just because they want us to begin to detach from that iteration of the character. And, I know we've discussed this a lot over the years on the Revengers and elsewhere, but right now in 2022, how does it feel to know you're going to officially say goodbye to that Batman? Or did you already do that years ago in your mind? Or, do you have any feelings about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy that we're getting kind of like a little farewell for him. But, at this point, listen, the news has been out there for a long time that he was done with the role. I was more shocked, I think, that he was doing one more cameo appearance than I was that he was done with the role. I think I was more shocked with that. So, so for me, I mean, I mentally kind of moved on, but I did like his Batman, enjoy his Batman. I will be always probably a little bit sad that we didn't get to see like a real solo, film with him, but for the most part, I'm happy to be able to see him in the Flash and give him his little farewell, and hopefully they do a nice job with that.
Yeah, to me, that's kind of like the coolest silver lining in all of this. Like I had already made my peace years ago that we were done with Ben Affleck as Batman, that we weren't going to see his version of the Batman come to fruition. But the fact that he agreed to come back for this Flash and we are going to get an actual sort of like send off for him, I'm glad about that. It would have sucked to just have another, superhero just disappear. Like I think about like how I wanted Brandon Routh to come back as Superman, and that ended, right? I think about Andrew Garfield's run as Spider-Man just suddenly ended before, and Ben Affleck was about to go on that list. I mean, and in a certain way, he will go on it because he didn't get his own solo movies. But the fact that he will get his send-off, and we're going to know this is the end, and it's not just going to be part of some weird limbo, and then we just never see it again, I'm happy about that.
Right.
But, but ultimately, I think that's the reason they did it. I really feel like the only reason that Jim Lee and DC and all those people would go to James Gunn and say, we don't want him in there, is because on some level, they want people to kind of start forgetting about him,
And that's really interesting, kind of as like a segue into our next piece, because listen, could they have had this like a silhouetted Batman and a silhouetted Cyborg so we didn't have to see Ben Affleck or Ray Fisher? Yeah, they could have done that, but like we said, they probably removed them just to avoid confusion, probably avoid all the discourse online. But then it even makes it even more interesting that they left a silhouetted Superman in there.